Early hours of the morning, and I'm just watching CNN coverage of the fallout from this interview. To show you, I put it on mute so I can make the video. It's interesting because it's their number one headline at the moment. Their second and third stories are respectively the crisis in Burma, and there's been more people killed there, and the designation of genocide of the Uyghur people in China. So that gives you an idea of what CNN's prioritizing. Um, make of that what you will. Um, I've been thinking a lot about monarchy tonight, as I have been recently. I watched The Queen, the Stephen Frears film from 2006, with Helen Mirren and Michael Sheen in the roles of the Queen and Tony Blair, respectively. I've also been sorting out newspapers. Um, my family seems to have a bit of a collection of, it seems to be mostly the Queen Mother's death, with a few from Diana's death. I'll just show you. Kind of been sorting them out. I collect newspapers, but I didn't realize we had all of these, so it's a bit of history there. There's also a 1994 supplement for the at that time 50th commemoration of D-Day, as it was then. Yeah, I want to just add a bit more on my thoughts about this situation because I think the idea that the palace is going to be totally silent is not going to happen. Apparently, the Queen and Charles and William have been in crisis talks. That's how they're putting it. It's covering all of our national papers. I'll be getting some later today. The big thing that is being homed in on here, interestingly more than the suicide issue, is the alleged racism. And that's not really surprising coming after 2020 when, you know, race issues were so profound. I think particularly in America, more so than Britain, race is such a volatile issue. Any notion of racial prejudice or racism, it really is like dynamite over there. Um, so that's why this statement that the Sussex has made about racial overtones, and actually it was Harry that mentioned the issue of colonial overtones with the press. I've just seen CNN has actually put a suicide hotline. Um, Colonial overtones with the press. I mean, that's coming from Prince Harry. This is a guy who, was serving in the British Army. I do think there's been something of a change in him. And one of my subscribers, I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning this, Tomo, you sent me a link, which I did watch, which actually showed Harry on a tour of duty. I'm guessing it would be late 2000s, early 2010s, talking about how he liked being in the army. It got him away from the press, but notably, he said, "Sometimes I don't like England, not the English press, but England, the country." I hope that wasn't as generic as it sounds, because it would be sad if a senior member of the royal family had animosity towards, and one of the most famous members of the royal family had animosity towards this country, a country that he served. Um, but the thing about the racism issue, it needs to be. The problem is, I think they've given a kind of halfway house. That's probably the wrong expression. They've alluded to racist attitudes from senior members of the royal family, but they haven't given any more information. They won't reveal a source other than it wasn't the Queen or the Duke of Edinburgh. Well, that kind of narrows it down. That can only leave Charles, Camilla, the Cambridges, and I guess Prince Edward. Andrew's kind of excluded from royal duties at the moment, so I don't think it would be Andrew. It kind of narrows it down. There are a few sticking points. I would be very surprised if this issue about the suicidal thoughts, you'd be pretty cool not to have some sympathy there, or at least consider sympathy. Anyone who's ever been through clinical depression would need to be. CNN's just covering 54 people now killed in Burma. So again, you could see where the priorities are. This kind of soap opera with the British royal family, um, when arguably there's real news happening in the world. But anyway, um, the problem is they're saying that there was racial overtones to this statement on the birth. Now, context is extremely important for something like that because it could be a kind of prejudice thing, like, oh, is the baby going to be brown? Or it could just be mere curiosity. As in talking about what will the baby look like? Will the baby have his mother's eyes, his father's eyes, um, or her, depending on the sex of the child? But I think, especially in the States, of course, it has to be racism. Now Harry knows what he's talking about. He would have known what the context was, and what he's done is he's opened a can of worms, and he isn't giving any context. So he said he didn't want to talk about it. So why mention it in the first place? I don't understand that. If it's something that bothered him, why sort of give this tantalizing glimmer of information without giving the full thing? Because if his idea is to be diplomatic, what's going to happen now is there's going to be a lot of speculation as to who it was, and like I said, it narrows it down really to probably 4 or 5 people. Um, the issue of I was going to get to the issue of Meghan's mental health. Again, it was only their perspective. Now, she says that she had no support. I think if it was the case that the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge were totally not approachable or totally cold to the unhappiness of the Duchess of Sussex, as her brother and sister-in-law, that would certainly cast William and Kate in a different light. But frankly, I find that hard to believe. I know there's public perception and there's private perception, but I've never heard anything about either William or Catherine being different from the public perception. I've never heard that they have a big facade and they're actually unpleasant people. For that reason, I would be very surprised if Meghan couldn't feel that she could have spoken to them, or even if Harry could have spoken to them. Okay, I can understand with the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh, even Charles, because there's a generational gap there, and they would probably be less understanding of mental health issues than the younger royals. But the idea that she was totally alone, I mean, I don't know, I can't second guess that. I wasn't in her shoes, but it just seems like quite an extraordinary claim. I do see a bit of a rift going to emerge here between, frankly, the United States and the United Kingdom over how this is portrayed. Because, like I say, there's a lot of American commentators just lining up to take her word as gospel. All I would say to them is you've only heard one side. This is not to say that, I want to be very clear here. As a British person, I don't like this idea that the Sussexes are putting out this message that the British are a cold, uncaring people, um, that don't care about mental health, that are racist. No, they didn't say those words. They didn't say the British are racist. But the overall tone of that interview doesn't exactly cast this country in a good light. And I think that is what I was concerned about with the interview. There would be kind of a smear on the United Kingdom. Um, and it frustrates me. It makes me concerned because it makes me wonder what the implications of this could be. I mean, clearly, if senior members of the royal family are having crisis talks, they understand that this is pretty serious. One newspaper, I don't know if it was the Daily Mirror or the Mail, was saying it's the biggest crisis for the monarchy in 85 years. So that's obviously referring to the abdication crisis. That would even be putting it above the fallout from Diana's death. Extraordinary. And bear in mind, the Queen's 94, the Duke of Edinburgh's 99. Um, as much as the Queen is in pretty good health for a woman of her age, she isn't going to be around forever. So this couldn't have come at a worse time. There's just a few closing thoughts I have for now, because no doubt there'll be more to say about this. Um, Number one, we have only heard one side. Palace is going to have to really, or rather, not just the palace, but the top levels of the royal institution, let's just call it what it is, are going to have to, I'm just kind of adjusting the volume here, they're going to have to really get a balanced approach. They can't be too defensive because that might look like they're being uncaring and unsympathetic. But frankly, I think they have a right to defend themselves if they feel that the allegations are unfair and untrue or distorted. Um, but they're going to have to get the balance right. They're going to have to come across as sympathetic. And I think, this is something that will probably have to change. I think the monarchy, particularly under this monarch, there is still an atmosphere of stuffiness about it that, in terms of protocol, in terms of some of the expectations that haven't really moved enough with the times. I'm talking about things like just saying the odious Chinese foreign minister make typical communist lies. It's probably a good thing that I've got it on mute. Anyway, yeah, I think they'll have to get the right balance because if they're too defensive, it could appear uncaring. If they are totally silent, then that's obviously something they can't do at the moment. So I think they're in a very difficult position. And of course, the Sussexes are free now. Harry said they're enjoying life, so they've just put this thing out. And Piers Morgan's got criticism not for the first time for being insensitive because he got into a very personal attack against Meghan and Harry, saying they're self-obsessed in the midst of a pandemic that's killed 2.5 million people. I've got very mixed views on Morgan. I think he enjoys controversy. Um, I don't entirely disagree with him, but there are times he lacks tact, frankly, because her mental health and suicidal thoughts has no bearing on the fact it's in the middle of a pandemic. I think he's linking two things that aren't really, a lot of people are depressed and have mental health issues. And Morgan infamously downplayed men's mental health at one point. He said that it's too often depression too often used as an excuse or something along those lines. So I don't always like the approach he takes. Um, Nevertheless, there is a reason why a lot of people in this country are not entirely convinced by what they saw yesterday. I think there's a perception that she is. I mean, I'll say this: there was one point of the interview that got me a little bit wary, which is when she sort of went from saying the Duchess of Cambridge took ownership of her what she had done, and that to me sounds like a managerial sort of statement, like telling someone off. Oh, she took ownership of what she done. It's very sort of woke language in terms of the controlling aspect of shaming someone else in that sense. And then she went from that to getting quite almost tearful at points. So I think we have to be a little bit careful about making statements like, as I've seen some people saying, "Oh, I don't believe a word she says." Well, we can't know that. We're not in her shoes. So from that point of view, I am somewhat sympathetic, but I'm only sympathetic to an extent because I think that we have only heard one side. And this business about, I detest the way the media really stokes up racism claims. Um, what they said was Harry was obviously uncomfortable about what was said regarding, but I don't know if they even used the word racist necessarily. So, of course, a lot of the press is stirring out racism claims. A lot of people will be thinking, well, is it racism or is it just, being a bit tactless? Because if it's in the context of looking down on baby Archie, then there'd certainly be something in that. But if it's a context of just curiosity, what's the baby going to look like? What sort of eyes will they have? Will they look like their father or their mother? And maybe the race issue came into that. Now, maybe Harry responded to that in a very sensitive way. Maybe it was an off-color joke. We don't know the context. And one of the biggest problems of discourse today is people rush to judgment without understanding the context of something, no more so than issues around race. And, I'm not saying that that was without a negative context. I'm saying that we don't know the context. And that's the problem with them kind of bringing this thing up because now they don't want to give the source, but there's going to be wild speculation. And, you know, someone in the palace will know, well, that's me they're talking about. I think it's really damaging all round. Worst crisis since the abdication, that might be an exaggeration, but I do think it's quite serious. And I can understand the palace taking it seriously. And I'll leave it there.